Danny Laurel. It's 10:30 a.m. Ayoko yun. Good morning. You're watching a home broadcast of Business World Live. I'm Danny Laurel. It's 10:30 a.m. this Wednesday in Manila. We're about 1 hour into our shortened trading day. Let's kick off with our top story. Now, in healthier times, April is usually associated with collecting taxes, but amid all the lockdowns and the job losses, Finance Chief Sonny Dominguez says the tax haul for the month will be, quote, very bad. Now, this comes just a couple of days after the Finance Department reported that major revenue agencies, BIR and the Customs, missed their targets for the first quarter. Now, this April will not be any better, and not just because the BIR moved the deadline for filing the taxes. The BIR says we will start to see the impact of dampened sales from businesses on tax collections. Now, on top of that, the BIR also points out that taxes from oil imports is one of the other major revenue streams from the government, and the recent slump in oil prices as well as demand will also start being felt this month. Now, as for lost jobs, S&P is estimating that the unemployment rate will hit 6.8% this year. That is up from their previous estimate of 5.3%, which they released just before the outbreak. That will also be on the back of a 14-year low of 5.1%, which we saw last year. Now, across the region, S&P Global Ratings sees unemployment jumping by well over 3 percentage points, which is much more than a typical recession. NEDA estimates that up to 1.8 million jobs will be displaced by measures to contain the virus outbreak. Now, recall our top story yesterday was how the WTI contracts for the May releases slumped to negative territory. That touched as low as negative $40 to a barrel yesterday. And, that's still our top story right now in terms of the markets. As you can see on my charts here, you're going to be seeing that crater, showing yesterday. We have since recovered in terms of WTI. We are now trading at $12.97 per barrel. But nevertheless, we also still saw, June futures as well. We did mention yesterday that did not slump as dramatically as the May inventory futures. But nevertheless, it did pummel 43% yesterday to close to $12 a barrel in New York. That actually triggered 3 circuit breakers along the way, meaning they had to halt trading 3 times yesterday. So that is actually back up by 20%. And you can see now on my charts here how crude oil has basically reversed from the negative territory that it was. But this, of course, happened after we saw a major reaction across all of equity markets, in particular the US, overnight. So recall that this is the second day that we've seen in the red massively. You can see the Dow Jones pummeling by 2.7% overnight, the S&P 500 more than 3%, and the NASDAQ by 3.5% of a cut. So definitely souring Wall Street overnight. This was actually the most in 3 weeks that it's been trading at a loss. Now, this after amid Donald Trump already saying that his administration is now working on a plan to make money available to the oil industry to prevent the loss of jobs. And you can see here how Asia Pacific is continuing to extend those losses that we saw, a very jittery trading day yesterday. That pain is not yet over. You can see the Nikkei 225 as of 10:13 this morning down by 1.13%. And the rest of Asia is still percolating, but you can see already some losses in Shanghai Composite as well as the Hang Seng down by 0.4%. So again, this comes despite the fact that there are a lot of positive developments when you talk about the outbreak. For instance, in France, they did report the number of patients in the intensive care fell to the lowest in 3 weeks. You also see Italy almost surpassing the recovery rate compared to the new cases. That's the first time we've been seeing that, but still a lot of jitters, analysts are saying, because of the fact that Singapore, which was once a standard bearer for taming the virus, has now reported more than 1,000 cases for the second day and has now announced that it will be extending its partial lockdown for more than 4 weeks. You can actually Singapore's FTSE Straits Times Index down by 1.3% as of 10:19 this morning. Still, one thing that the Philippines is saying, at least when it comes to the oil story, is that we might be a big beneficiary of the oil price crash. And this is according to the Department of Finance Undersecretary Gil Beltran. He does mention that we import around $10 billion worth of petrol products per year, and our domestic production is much smaller compared to this, of course, and it actually drops every year. But the offset of that is the fact that, as we've already reported, the government expects to see a decline in tax collections from petroleum products, especially as the prompt prices and the demand continues to slide. And this, of course, could threaten the customs collection. And this is according to Bino Abad. He is the DOE Oil Industry Management Bureau Director. He did note that, though, that gasoline prices have actually fallen by 14 pesos and 52 centavos per liter. But he does say that even if this should be good for consumers, of course, we cannot necessarily, use the oil prices or take this to our advantage right now, since we are, of course, in enhanced community quarantine. So wala namang lumalabas there. But what the Independent Philippine Petroleum Companies Association is saying is that the government should take advantage of this slump in oil prices should it decide to actually start going back and boosting its infrastructure activities. I just want to take a quick peek at the world currency ranker, because I just want to illustrate here how the peso is nevertheless the top 4 performer in terms of spot returns year to date. You can see that it's still in negative territory, so still weaker compared to, for instance, the yen and the dollar, which are considered Hong Kong dollar rather, which are considered safe haven currencies. But still, the peso is not necessarily showing weakness compared to the other currencies. And this is related to what SEB has been saying, that the peso might actually strengthen on the back of the oil prices sinking. They did say that it would be one of Asia's biggest beneficiaries, the Philippines, in terms of the drop in oil. This is from Eugenia Victorino. She does say that the trade deficit might be narrowing, inflation will be slow, supporting our local currency and the bonds, and also possibly giving more room for monetary policy to be easing. Just a very quick peek on how our local currency is doing amid all of these oil issues. We did see it strengthening a touch as oil went down. It's now weakening to 50.838 to a dollar. As I mentioned, we actually did see how oil pared back those losses. And finally, very quick peek at how our markets are opening. This Wednesday morning, we were not spared from that risk of sentiment. And as I mentioned, the rest of Asia opening in the red after another bad showing over in Wall Street. We are still at 5,500 levels, 5503.79. That is down a hefty 1 6/8%, extending Tuesday's losses of 2.5%. Now, this from Diversified Securities is Aniceto Pangan saying oil's negative effect on the equity markets may continue for the rest of the week. There's also this issue that Saudi Arabia and Russia may continue to flood the oil supply. And another thing to note here is net foreign selling. That continued for the 25th straight day yesterday. Foreigners fleeing, taking out around 760 million pesos with them. And very quick peek on how our sectors are performing. This Wednesday morning, a mixed bag here. You've actually got 3 out of 6, so 50%. Slightly with gains led by services up by 1 4/10%, but you can still see worrying indices here, holding firms down by 2 8/10%. properties, and industrials leading those losses. So more on markets later on in the broadcast. Moving on to other headlines we're watching this Wednesday morning, the newly installed NEDA chief, that is Carl Kendrick Chua, will prioritize finishing an economic recovery plan and the registration of 5 million people to the national ID system. Chua, who took the helm after the resignation of former Economic Planning Secretary Ernie Pernia, says fast-tracking the national ID registration will help the government's efforts in the relief distribution as the virus outbreak continues. Now, Chua says the Philippine Statistics Authority will use the next 2 months to finish procurement and preparation so that registration could begin by June at the earliest. The new planning chief did not elaborate his position on a possible lockdown extension, but he said he will remain dependent on data. We will expect no reorganization in NEDA as well. That's according to Chua, who does not want the agency to be, quote, bogged down internally as it responds to the health crisis. NEDA is set to submit its assessment report moving forward to the IATF. Chua says the economic recovery plan will have to be very flexible. It also includes a call to increase testing capacity. As for the government's Build program, Chua says they will need to determine projects that will be prioritized once the situation normalizes. Chua said it's no question that implementation and construction of the flagship project will continue to revive the economy soon. NEDA will soon revise the macroeconomic targets with 2018 as the base year for GDP. Now, as Filipinos try to adapt to stay-at-home orders, food delivery services have become more in demand. That's after the implementation of the Luzon-wide lockdown last month. A report by Maybank Kim Eng sees food deliveries surging from a low base in 2019 as more food merchants sign up with delivery platforms. The report, however, did note limitations with the country's technology adoption and online payment systems. According to Maybank, Philippines has the lowest e-commerce penetration rate in the region. However, there is still room for growth. It noted big companies boosting their online presence and small businesses trying to reach more customers through e-commerce channels amid this pandemic. The Maybank report noted that if all goes well, the trend may persist even after the lockdown ends. The FBI, or that is the Federation of Philippine Industries, calls on the government to allow manufacturing of non-essential goods to return once the enhanced community quarantine is lifted. Now, for this, the industry group is recommending a set of guidelines in a letter addressed to secretaries of concerned agencies. FBI chairman, that is Jesus Lim Aranza, pointed out that industries need to meet the demand for products once the ECQ is lifted, including materials for home and auto repair. Aranza said manufacturers of non-essential goods must be allowed to restart operations immediately if they are willing to, given that they conduct sanitary measures before reopening. The FBI also proposes that personnel must not be allowed to return home and that companies must provide their employees housing close to their facilities. Aranza also called on the creation of a committee composed of representatives from the government and the private sector to coordinate the restarting of operations. The question now is, are manufacturers of non-essential goods ready for such a move? And how are businesses in general preparing for the worst? Here to share with us his insight, we have with us the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry President, Mr. George Barcelon. Sir, thank you so much for joining us on Business World Live this morning.
Morning, Danny.
Good morning, sir. I just want to kick off with what we just reported from the FBI. Apart from them, sir, top business leaders have been calling for a partial lift of the lockdown, some even asking 50% of normalization to businesses. You've also got the Management Association calling for public transport to be partially back. What is the likelihood of that, sir? And is the PCCI backing that?
Danny, before I start, I just want to clarify. I'm here representing the private sector as the member of Ledak.
Okay.
Ledak is
I think we're getting some technical difficulties right now. I'm going to check with my producers. Sir,
yes,
can you
yes.
hear
I
me?
can hear. I can see you. Okay.
Go ahead, sir. Sorry, it was choppy. Go ahead,
The
sir.
yeah. The everybody, of course, is anticipating the lapse of April 30, which is the enhanced community quarantine. There have been many meetings where the private sectors has expressed their desire for a modified quarantine.
Okay.
Now, having said that, we know also that the government is careful in analyzing the steps that have been taken to flatten the COVID-19 curve. And we have to say that based on the data that the government has been able to achieve a certain level of success. Okay? Daily, we do have increase in people being infected, and I'm glad to see the mortality numbers is not as high as the past week.
Mm-hmm.
The modified quarantine, as being suggested, is only for areas that are that I would say rather safe. In other words, the containment and the mitigation that has been done the past 6 weeks have shown justification for that. But there are certain areas, certain barangays where the numbers does not justify for a modified quarantine. The
Mm-hmm.
private sector, through all this time, has been very supportive of what the government actions regarding the containing the COVID-19 and have been very supportive. If you notice in the papers or in TV, a lot of big companies have really been generously donating
Mm-hmm.
PPE, supplies, alcohol, even funds. I think the the malasakit or the bayanihan spirit is there, and that brings out the best of the Filipinos.
Mm-hmm.
The
Sir,
now, yes,
go ahead, sir. Sir,
yes,
just to
Danny.
clarify po, the modified community quarantine that you are pushing for as a member as well as LEDA, does that include also non-essential businesses? Or are you pushing, sir, first for the essential businesses to really be operating at 100% capacity first?
Yes, Danny, the essential, uh, if you talk about the agri, food, pharmaceutical, uh, also health services, this has been allowed ever since even we have the ECQ. Okay? Now, this part of modified is expanding, okay, to some of the non-essential. Okay? Uh, one of the hardest hit sector is the MSMEs. Here in
Yes.
the Philippines, we have about 1 million micro, small, medium enterprise, and about half of them are in the NCR. So be concerned, and the government has been aware of this, that the financial resources are limited.
Okay.
So DOF have come out with some social amelioration to give the small firms, employee of these small firms, some financial aids. So this is something that I have government level that
Mhm.
we also have to take a look at the survival rate of the MSMEs.
Sir, do you have some statistics on that top of mind right now?
I,
Have you already assessed how many closures there have been, or people might have been fired already, or are businesses still in wait and see mode? Are there still cushions in place? The government has
the
releasing loans.
yeah, the data that I have gathered also from government data is there are more than 1 million people that is displaced Okay, and then you have the informal sectors. Okay, the informal sectors is quite big, and with this lockdown, they are badly affected also. Um, Earlier, when you when the program started, you gave some statistics of other countries, and you mentioned, I think, the unemployment numbers in the U.S., which is very high. Yeah. Um, as of now, our unemployment rate is more like close to 7%.
Right.
So it's cause for concern. It's cause for concern. The private sector basically is the desire is really, to inject a bit of life in the economy and bring, the healthy people that who can work and who can still be productive back into the stream. But we're very careful. I mean, you have to note that the private sector take this COVID-19 very seriously. We see the spike in Singapore. For a while, they thought that they've done everything, contact tracing, and they are able to contain it to about 1,000. But in 2 weeks' time, the number in Singapore now is 9,000
Oo nga.
people infected. So we're still inching to 7,000. I'm glad that DOH Secretary Charlie Galvez has initiated, many of the quarantine centers and also expanding the testing. Our testing is now still quite low. We're only about 8,000 tests a day. Um, Ideally, maybe in a month or so, this could go up to about 25,000 tests a day. I just heard good news that there's a shipment of equipments
Mm.
coming from donated from China. I think this is in line with the ADB to be set up in the north in Pampanga,
Mhm.
wherein they can make, I think, at least 3,000 tests a day using the PCR, RT-PCR, they call it gold standard test.
Okay.
So the testing must go on. It's imperative that testing must go on. They can run parallel with the rapid test. Okay, the
Mhm.
rapid test is this is really has been initiated by the private sector, primarily headed by PA Joy Concepcion. I'm sure you heard about that. And a
Yes.
lot of private sectors have joined in because they want to be sure that when they get their workers back, that the workers at least are checked to see the physical conditions.
Mhm.
We know very well that this virus, when it's asymptomatic, is very infectious,
Mhm.
and we don't want workers to be in the working within the close quarter, and they may infect their fellow workers. So we
Okay.
have to
Sir,
be
just to
careful on that.
clarify your position, sir, regardless of the fact that you have already mentioned, Singapore saw a resurgence in cases, and there's a possibility that if you have a modified community quarantine, that, businesses can reopen and then it might close na naman if the infection rate surges again. So we might actually be seeing what analysts call a W-shaped recovery here. But nevertheless, given that you're still pushing or would like to see a partial reopening.
Yes. Well, alam mo na, Danny, we are archipelagic. Okay, with Visayas, with Mindanao, Northern Luzon, we're quite big and quite spread out. If you look at the map of areas that are being infected, malaki sa NCR, also north, no? But in the regional uh, level, only the major cities like Cebu and Davao. Okay? So it can be considered, okay, like anything else, it's a calculated risk. Okay?
Mhm.
But I would like to think that both government and private sector take into consideration that what's need to be done. One thing that we have to look towards May is the planting season.
Hmm.
Okay, and as of now, I've been hearing because of this enhanced community quarantine, semi-lockdown, nahirapan yung mga magsasaka, okay, getting the
Correct.
supplies here and there. Yung yung policies or guidelines applied by the different barangay, they're not on the same page.
Mm.
Nakakaiba. So if you're a businessman, sometimes,
Yeah.
you need urgent delivery, then your supplies or even manpower. That's one of the key issue now. If you want to open up, two areas that's very important. The public transportation.
Mm.
That has to be, I think, at this point in time, government should already bring the Department of Transportation to work on what would be the protocol. Okay?
Okay.
So these are things I think the government is doing some preparations.
Sir, on that note, do you think that it makes sense to open or reopen or gradually lift sector by sector instead of
Uh,
barangay level as the government is saying? And if so, sir, which would be the priority sectors?
well, the essential sectors has been allowed already. Export sectors, BPO, this has been allowed.
Mm.
Okay. Other sectors must be a business decision. When I say business decision, there are three factors that's very important. First is the market must be there, okay? Because we lost a lot of market when you see the consumer being affected. Secondly is the manpower mobility. Okay? As of now, I know that even some of the essential industries, they cannot get, you know, even drivers, helpers, the
Correct.
banks, they cannot get their people work. So the manpower mobility must be there. The third is your supply chain convenience. Okay?
Mm.
Because you're opening an area in one barangay, you see people will be coming from different places. Minsan, yung mga ibang barangay, kanyang-kanyang ruling. Okay? They will not allow people or raw material to be
Oo.
coming out. So those are the three factors, I think. And,
Okay.
and it's better, I think, with regard to opening. It's not even by sector.
Mm.
It's basically for the private sector working with their local authorities. Okay,
Okay.
wherein because they are the one providing jobs.
Mhm.
Now, if the local authorities, taking all the precautions would allow them, then they can. So this would be a business decision based on certain factors.
Sir, last question before I let you go. Have you seen already capex plans, investments being derailed from the private sector? And do you feel that there might be a risk of contagion in the banking sector in terms of defaults from loans, not just the big corporates, but also MSMEs?
I think that is to be expected, and the government realizes that. That's why BSP and the DOAs they've come out with some moratorium on loan. And if you notice, the mall operators have been very cooperative. Nag-waive sila ng rental for a month, no? But then it has been extended. So I don't know, I mean, whether they'll be extending it again. So the numbers is hard to, give you a percentage. But I sense getting feedback from some sectors that the small ones, many of them marginal business establishment, have have closed, have let go of their people.
Mm.
So there's a program for this. The government is talking about probably raising an amount of 1.2 to 1.3 trillion. This is from Secretary Sani Dominguez. So this would be a stimulus for the business, establishment
Mm.
to be able to stand up on their feet again. It will take time. We're not. I don't think that we have to rush into this. The new normal, as we said, is uncertainty.
Mhm.
And one thing that, in a way, the paradigm shift, you might call it, all of a
Mhm.
sudden you see a lot of small companies knowing, learning how to operate in this platform. You know, you notice the supply chain has improved as far as servicing of food and the likes. So it's not that we need something like that, to push us to use that. But that is something that going forward, any country would have to learn, will have to gravitate towards that e-commerce.
Okay, thank you so much for those insights. That was, of course, President Emeritus of the PCCI, George Barcelon. Thank you, sir, for joining us. He did mention that
Yeah.
it's possible to have a partial lifting of the ECQ, provided that there is strong support from both private and the barangay level in terms of moving forward in the new normal. Thank you, sir, for joining us.
Thank you, Danny. Bye-bye.
Okay, very quick peek at our markets and how we are faring this morning. And of course, our movers here, especially given the fact that we have slid to 55 levels yet again. We do see 5 bright spots in total, so not a lot, I've got to say, as we trade at 5,500 levels, 5,504 really. We do see PLDT and Globe, the 2-star performers. These have been the only 2 out of 3, including Pure Gold, that have been in the green all throughout this tough year. PLDT up by 4.7%, Globe as well 2.7%. Nevertheless, you've got others sitting out the rally. Basically, most of the big guns here, including the holding firms, GD Cap slumping by 2.3%, together with AGI. And you're going to be seeing a lot of the, apart from the conglomerates like Ayala Corporation and SM property firms, Ayala Land, Mega World, Robinson's Land, all sustaining the losses that we've seen since yesterday. That's a first look into the business day. Today is April 22nd, 2020. Thank you so much for watching. Catch us again tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. I'm Danny Laurel, and we are One News. Alay.